The animated TV show Invincible is one of the best adaptations for a comic book that I've ever seen, and I'm talking about any adaptation, whether it's animation, live action, anything. And a big part of that is the fact that Invincible can somehow stay extremely loyal to the source material while at the same time changing so much. And that's probably not going to make sense with me describing it because it sounds a bit like a contradiction. It doesn't really make much sense, but once I explain it, maybe it'll make a lot more sense. Now, the whole way that the narrative is structured is actually one of the most interesting changes with the entire show. Basically, what they end up doing is a little bit of a lot of things. They take some things out of the show completely that were in the comic, and then they add new animated original stuff. And that's fine, really easy to understand. But what's really weird is whenever they take things later on in the comic series and insert it before the season finale. So a lot of things within the TV show happen out of order compared to the comic. And that's what's so interesting. They managed to make all these weird changes, but somehow it's still executed really well. But the changes that I find most interesting happen to do with the characters themselves. Now, Mark is a character that stays mostly the same. The changes within his character are barely even noticeable, if there's any at all. So that means that most of the changes that we see are changes with other characters that he has a lot of interactions with. And the biggest one here has to be his father, Nolan, aka Omni Man. Now, when I say that they change his character, they're not doing anything drastically different. Omni Man and what he's supposed to represent is exactly the same from the comic to the TV show, but what is vastly different is how it's executed. So what the TV runners decided to do is decided to streamline Omni Man as a character and make him way more suspenseful. While he is still super intimidating in the comic, he's not nearly as ominous as he is in the TV show. But while his character did stay the same from the comic to the TV show, his wife is completely different. Debbi within the comic is pretty much just your average mom, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, I almost prefer it. But within the TV show, she's given a lot more to do. She's pretty much an investigator. Throughout the entire show, she's probably made the most progress when it comes to actually finding out what Omni Man did. Everybody else came to the conclusion that he did, but they didn't really find the evidence to do so. There's of course other characters like Damian Darkblood who did more investigating, but what I'm trying to say here is that she did a whole lot more within this TV show than she did in the comic. And while I would say that there's pros and cons to that, the pros definitely outweigh the cons. But just for me personally, I like the whole idea of her being completely shocked and not really having any idea just because she was so much of a trusting mother and wife, rather than somebody that was really doubting Nolan the entire time and going as far to investigate him. But while I was a little bit on the fence about the changes with Debbi's character, but a character that changed completely for the better is definitely Eve. And her changes are a lot more subtle. There's not like a huge change with her character, but somehow it works so well. Because within the actual comic itself, I hate Eve as a character, but in the TV show I actually find myself enjoying her screen time, something that I was just completely not expecting. And I think a lot of that has to do with how genuine her character is, because within the comic she's kind of a petty person. Whenever she finds out that Mark and Amber are dating, she decides to date his best friend. But in the TV show, when she does go over to Mark to try and talk to him and find out that he's now dating Amber, at least making out with her anyway, she just says, "Good for you, Mark." That's a subtle change that improves Eve's character drastically. And there are plenty other examples of stuff like this with Eve as a character. And hopefully they keep up with those changes in the future, because Eve's character only gets worse in the comic. But heading on to a character that I really did love early on within the comic is actually Amber. And unfortunately, I don't really like her character within the TV show. Now there's some obvious changes that I'll get into in a second, but there's also some subtle ones that completely change her character. For the worse, I might add. And the biggest one for me is her knowing Invincible's identity the entire time. Within the source material, she was completely out of the loop, so whenever Mark would do something that would come off as really shitty, she'd just kind of have to deal with it. And you really felt for her because she gave Mark a lot of second chances, kind of like she does in the TV show, but to an even bigger extent. But like I said, the key difference here is Amber within the comic does not know that Mark is invincible, so whenever he does reveal to her his true identity, she doesn't just push him away, she actually accepts him and realizes how hard of a decision that really was and how much he trusts her now. Amber within the TV show is not like this at all. She knew he was invincible the whole time, something that I'm already not a fan of. And on top of that, she also pushes him away whenever he does finally decide to trust her. But yeah, the bigger changes that most people will take note of is the obvious race change. She was white in the comics, now she's black in the TV show, something that I don't think matters at all. It's not like her race was super important to her character in the first place. And then we have some corny stuff like fourth wave feminism and stuff like that that's not really even noteworthy. It's just corny, I guess. But that does lead me into talking about another character change I wasn't really a big fan of, and that's Mark's best friend William. Now, the biggest change you're going to notice here is the fact that the characters aren't even noticeably best friends. They barely have any screen time together, which is vastly different from the actual comic itself. And on top of that, they just don't seem close. But looking past the fact that he doesn't really have that much screen time and him and Mark don't really talk that much, there's the most noticeable change, and that's the fact that he's openly gay from the beginning of the show. Compare that to the comic where he's in the closet for a good portion at the beginning. And it's kind of an amalgamation of these two that take away just a lot of the funnier and fun moments that we see early on. Plus, I think whenever William came out to Mark, it was just a really good scene. Not only was it kind of funny, but at the same time, I just feel like it was executed really well. But lastly, we have Damian Darkblood. And I want to talk about his character really quick because in the comic itself, he's just a gag character compared to the TV show where he plays an extremely important role. But since it's not really a spoiler, let me go ahead and describe his character in the comic. Basically, he's just a running gag for a little bit, and then his character gets concluded pretty later on. But essentially, his character starts in the same time it starts with the TV show. The Guardians of the Globe have just gotten murdered by Omni Man, and the whole mystery surrounding the whole situation starts. So he begins investigating everything that's going on. And over time, you'll see him, whether it's in the background or he gets a panel to himself where he's kind of noticeable, but his story doesn't really conclude until way later. And by then, the whole mystery surrounding Omni Man has already been solved. Everybody already knows that Omni Man killed the Guardians of the Globe, but despite this, throughout the entire time, Damian Darkblood has been investigating the murder. So at kind of a random moment, he shows up and tries to tell Cecil that the Guardians have been murdered, and the person behind those murders was Omni Man himself. But like I said, everybody already knows this. So that was essentially the gag. I know it's not funny when I explain it, but it was funny in the actual comic itself. So yeah, for the TV show, they decided to completely change his character, and it's not really something I feel too strongly about. I don't really like his character or dislike his character. It's just something that changed, I guess. But yeah, that's going to be pretty much it. I've talked about all the changes that I wanted to talk about, whether it be the really odd approach to narrative structure that somehow worked almost flawlessly, or the pretty unique character changes that ended up working for the better or worse. But if you've made it this far, go ahead and tell me your favorite character in Invincible in the comments below.